Thank you to Nola Mattress for sponsoring this video. More about them later on. When the topic of Mongolian history is addressed, it is easy to succumb to the pull of that massive center of gravity and attention, Genghis Khan, or Genghis Khan, and his formidable empire. But this country's more recent history is equally rich in intrigue, with titanic existential conflicts and, unfortunately, despotic rule and massacres. From the early 1920s to the years of World War II and the onset of the Cold War, the present and future of Mongolia were shaped by a little-known figure, one who maneuvered in the shadows for much of his political career, before forging an ironclad alliance with Moscow's Man of Steel and emerging as the undisputed leader of the Mongolian flatlands. This is the story of Khorloogiin Choibalsan, the communist ruler who became known as the Stalin of the steppes. Welcome back to Biographics. I'm your host Eric Malachite, and today's script was provided by Arnaldo Teodrani, so be sure to show them some love as you deploy your likes and do all the things that help keep the eldritch beast that is the YouTube algorithm going. Let's get to it. A quick note about pronunciation. I'm probably going to butcher most of these Mongolian pronunciations because Mongolian is hard, and quite frankly, mispronunciations on Biographics is a time-honored tradition, and if you don't believe me, go check the comment sections on our earlier videos. Very little is known about the early years of Khorloogiin Choibalsan. The little boy was born out of wedlock on February 8, 1895 from a poor herdswoman named Kolu and a father whose identity remains uncertain. As a means to escape poverty and the harsh life on the steppes, Karl and her boy join a Buddhist monastery at the age of 13. Choibalsan was not suited for a monk's life, however, and at the age of 17 he escaped to the capital city of Mongolia, Kiria, today called Ulaanbaatar. It was an exciting time to be an ambitious teen in the capital city, as the country had just declared its independence from the Chinese Empire. But let me give you some more context. At the dawn of the 20th century, the Chinese Qing Empire, following decades of foreign interference, sought to re-establish control across its vast territories. One of its provinces, in particular, had always enjoyed considerable autonomy from central power, Outer Mongolia, today simply known as Mongolia. When the Qing attempted to curb such autonomy, the Mongols responded by declaring their independence in 1911 under the leadership of the living Buddha Bogd-Geging Khan, also known as the Hutuktu. Mongolian elites sought to forge foreign alliances to protect their independence, and the Russian Empire came to the fore, happy to create a buffer state between them and China. In 1915, the Russians sponsored an agreement which restored China's formal suzerainty over Mongolia, but which essentially granted de facto autonomy for the territory. The friendship with Russia provided a great opportunity for Choibalsan, as he enrolled in a school for Russian-Mongolian language interpreters. Choibalsan continued his studies in Irkutsk, Siberia. Here, in late 1917, he first heard about and learned to appreciate the political idea that was about to shake up Tsarist Russia and the entire world: communism. Now, we've had our Nola mattress for about 6 months, and we still have no complaints. The mattress is in our guest room, also for when wife needs a break from my snoring. So when one of wife's friends stayed with us, I asked them what they thought of the mattress, and they described it as heavenly. So I can say without a doubt that you won't be disappointed with today's sponsor, Nola Mattress. The full-size mattress that was sent to us has been popular with our guests. Whenever my back needs a break, I know I can lay down in the guest room, take a nap, and reset before getting back to work. Oh, and that guest that I mentioned, they had more to say about their experience with the mattress. They said, "The mattress is both very soft and supportive. It's like snuggling with a marshmallow. I woke up with no back pain and also very well rested. It is melatonin in bed form." Nola Mattress delivers your new mattress right to your door, with free shipping on orders made in the US. The mattress arrives rolled up in a box, and getting set up is super easy. It literally took 5 minutes to unbox and inflate the mattress and pillows before we were able to take it for a test drive, i.e. nap time. Nola Mattress also has a 120-night sleep trial that allows you to test your mattress out to make sure it's the right fit for you. All right, so we have just now laid down on the mattress, and it is super comfy.
You can make the bed around me, right?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
You're just gonna nap?
Yeah.
All right. I think we're gonna keep it. I love Nola Mattress, and I think you will too. If you're looking to upgrade your sleep, head to nolamattress.com/biographics and use code BIOGRAPHICS to get an extra $50 off your Nola mattress. This is an additional discount on top of what is being offered on site, so check them out while you can. Now, back to the video. In 1917, the Russian Empire was rocked by two revolutions, with Lenin's Bolsheviks eventually rising to power. The new government, however, enforced the previous agreement, and in August of 1919, Soviet Russia recognized the independence of Mongolia. But almost immediately, Chinese troops occupied the capital city of Kyria, now Ulaanbaatar, and removed the Hutuktu, the living Buddha, from power. It was at this stage that several Mongolian independent forces started to assemble. These included nationalist and communist groups, both of whom sought to make contact with Russian Bolsheviks for military and material support. The two main groups were those led by Tamtin Sukpata and our hero Choibalsan. The former was a man of action, a former military officer motivated by nationalist ideals whose main aim was simply to expel the Chinese. Choibalsan, on the other hand, was closer to the Bolsheviks and their ideology. His dual goal was to defeat the Chinese, but also reform Mongolian society according to communist ideals. This sounds like the setup for an epic ideological struggle, like the Civil War, which would later oppose the nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek to the communist helmsman Mao Zedong in China. But in reality, when Choibalsan and Sukpata met, they got on like wildfire and decided to work together for the liberation of their country. The two allies escaped Chinese-occupied Mongolia to enter Siberia and make contact with Russian revolutionaries, which they saw as key allies in defeating the invaders. Then, in June 1920, they returned to Kyria in secret, where they participated in the foundation of the Mongolian People's Party, or MPP. Before they could even organize their partisan forces, the Chinese were attacked by a new, unpredictable contestant in this complicated game of chess. This was Baron Ungern Sternberg, aka the Mad Baron, or the Buddhist Baron. This aristocratic adventurer had been leading his fearsome cavalry units in the civil war that pitted White Russians against Red Russians. In October 1920, the Mad Baron swept into Mongolia with barely 900 men, looking to oust the Chinese and take control of the country. His meager force was soon joined by many of the Mongol elites, and he even received the Hutuktu's backing. In February 1921, Ungern Sternberg had taken Kyria and reinstated the Hutuktu on the throne. The Chinese were not entirely defeated, however, and still occupied the region around Kyata, now part of Russia. It was finally time for Sukpata and Choibalsan to get into the action. The two revolutionaries rallied a partisan force consisting of 400 troops that were ill-equipped and poorly trained, but thanks to their earlier talks with the Bolsheviks, they received a reinforcement of 10,000 Soviet troops. That was more like it. The Soviet Mongolian forces defeated the Chinese in March 1921 and then marched toward the capital, ready to take on the Mad Baron. While all the parties involved had one enemy in common, the Chinese, let's not forget that the Red Army was a mortal enemy to white officers like Ungern Sternberg. Moreover, the Mad Baron had proven himself to be a ruthless leader. After seizing the capital Kyria, he had established a violent reign of terror, immediately alienating support from the Mongols. So yeah, it was time to get rid of him. As Sukpata and Choibalsan's communist partisans and Soviet allies approached Kyria, the Hutuktu attempted to prevent their advance by using a dewey, a sort of magical structure meant to repel demons. It did not work because magic isn't real. On July 9th, the Mongolian People's Party established a new government which retained the Hutuktu as head of state. Sukpata bagged an appointment as Minister of War, but his pal Choibalsan was still a figure in the background, waiting for the right moment to emerge to the forefront. In 1924, following the death of the Hutuktu, Mongolia became a People's Republic, and its capital, Kyria, was renamed Ulaanbaatar, which means that I no longer have to butcher it, and I can butcher a ton of other words instead. You're welcome. In the years following this proclamation, Moscow certainly had a growing influence. Mongolia's exports to China and Western countries declined dramatically, while exports to the Soviet Union increased from 13.7% of total to 85.5% by the end of the 1920s. But the Soviets still had to extend their full political grasp over the young republic. In other words, the political system had not fully converted to socialism, with much of the economy still in the hands of private businesses run by wealthy and mostly conservative elites. Some of these elites managed to hold positions of power in the government and even the People's Party. As they feared a complete turn towards a socialist economic model, they sought a rapprochement with their old Chinese connections and even with the Japanese, seeking to extend their sphere of influence over continental Asia. This conservative faction, labeled right deviationists, was led by the chairman of the Central Executive Committee of the People's Party, Tsarin Ochirin Dambadorj, and I probably butchered that, but I could not find a pronunciation for this guy's name anywhere. He resented the growing influence of the Soviet Union and favored an alliance with the Kuomintang, the Chinese Nationalist Party. The opposition to Dambadorj was led by Choibalsan, and this was his time to shine. Whereas the right deviationists were supported by merchants, traders, the Buddhist clergy, and educated elites, Choibalsan sought support amongst the lower classes, soldiers, poor herders, and workers. According to American Orientalist Owen Lattimore, yes, that is a very dated term, Choibalsan gathered support by exploiting his natural charisma and by embracing Mongolian traditions. So he was a populist. For example, he showed up at traditional games rallies, participating in archery and horse riding contests. He spent time with herdsmen in their tents, drinking mare's milk and talking about their needs and problems. Often he replaced milk with alcoholic beverages, for which he had a particular fondness, which is a euphemism to say he was a heavy drinker, a habit that would later take a toll on his health, but which also took him closer to the people he wanted to convert to his cause. Choibalsan's effort paid off. In 1928, at the 8th Congress of the Mongolian People's Party, a 25-day debate resulted in a victory for Choibalsan's leftist faction. What followed was a purge of the party ranks in pure Soviet style. The right deviationists were removed from office positions, and a commission headed by Choibalsan expropriated the assets of 669 noble families. If only they had 3 less noble families. That would be a funny number. In 1931, Choibalsan continued the collectivization of Mongolian society, confiscating the goods of further 837 households. The People's Party was also particularly harsh against the Buddhist clergy. Some 200 lamas had their properties entirely confiscated. The remaining clerics were driven out of their monasteries and had to suffer high taxes. Excessive taxation also struck small traders and handicraft workers, regardless of their actual income. What was worse, these levies were applied also to livestock, the backbone of the Mongolian economy. Herders were now aware that their animals could be confiscated at any time, either to pay for arrear taxes or to be assigned to collective state-owned farms. As a consequence, herders lost any incentive to competently manage their stock, leading to the death of huge numbers of animals. These were not the only recorded deaths in the 1930 to 1932 period, as the People's Party carried out the imprisonment or execution of 711 heads of household accused of opposing the state. This period was later known by Soviet observers as the left deviation. Mongol writers preferred to use the term left mistake, as indeed it was counterproductive to the cause of communism in the country. First of all, the harsh treatment of Buddhist clergy led many opponents of communist ideology to rally around the lamas for leadership. Then uprisings broke out, mainly in the western half of the country. Even members of the party, its youth league, and detachments of the army joined the rebels, leading to a large-scale civil war with thousands of casualties. Let's return to Choibalsan for a second. The party official was arguably responsible for the unrest. By leading the purges and expropriations against the right deviation, he had fanned the flames of the left deviation, resulting in the escalation of violence. But as he observed that his country was descending into chaos, he soon backtracked. He rejected his own policies, claiming that the taxation and collectivization measures had been applied too early, too harshly, and with little competence. Once again, he appealed to Moscow for help, and Premier Joseph Stalin obliged. First, he dispatched a motorized army corps to Western Mongolia, thus quelling the rebellion and restoring order. Then, on May 29, 1932, the Soviet Communist Party drafted a report in which they heavily criticized the left deviation. In June, armed with this document, Choibalsan convened a central investigative committee which denounced the left deviation, reversed its policies, and announced a new plan called the New Turn. With this move, Choibalsan had established himself as an undisputed rising star within the People's Party. His new turn shared the same objectives as the left deviation, i.e. a rapid shift towards a fully socialist economy. But instead of espousing coercive methods, it placed the emphasis on persuasion, propaganda, and education. The new policy worked, further propelling Choibalsan's rise to the top. While Choibalsan was dealing with internal tensions in Mongolia, an external threat was building up on its borders. On September 18, 1931, the Imperial Japanese Army staged the Mukden incident, widely believed to be a false flag attack to justify their occupation of Manchuria in northeastern China. The following year, Japan established the puppet state of Manchukuo, right on the border with Mongolia. Japan continued their encroachment of Mongolian territory, annexing the Jehol province south of Manchukuo in 1933. The Mongolian government felt threatened, and after a border incident with Japanese troops in 1935, they signed a mutual aid protocol with Moscow in March 1936. As early as 1934, the Japanese threat had created an atmosphere of suspicion and paranoia, a staple of Soviet-style regimes. In that year, the leader of the Mongolian People's Party, and I'm gonna butcher this because I could not find a pronunciation guide anywhere for it, Jambin Lukumbi, was arrested following orders from Moscow. Go ahead, complain about it in the comments. I know you want to, your fingers are just itching. The official was accused of consorting with Japanese spies, a charge which resulted in his arrest and execution. Choibalsan also came under suspicion in the same period and was taken to Moscow for interrogation by the NKVD, Stalin's feared secret police. Not only was Choibalsan cleared of all charges, but he enthusiastically offered to cooperate with the NKVD to root out other Philo-Japanese moles. Upon his return to Ulaanbaatar, Choibalsan had become a trusted asset and ally for Stalin. On the insistence of the Soviet leader, Choibalsan was appointed Minister of the Interior and Deputy to Prime Minister Khorloogiin Choibalsan. This may have been a calculated move to keep tabs on Gendon, whom Stalin did not trust. You see, the Soviet premier feared that Chiang Kai-shek's Chinese nationalists may stage an invasion of Mongolia, aided by a Buddhist fifth column. To preempt this eventuality, Stalin demanded for an all-out anti-Buddhist repression. Gendon, who had a habit of antagonizing Stalin, staunchly refused. It is reported that on one occasion, the gutsy Gendon grabbed Stalin's pipe out of his mouth and smashed it on the floor. Unsurprisingly, in 1936, Gendon was arrested, deported to the Soviet Union, and executed. In February of the same year, Stalin appointed Choibalsan as the new leader of the Mongolian People's Party, and by the start of 1937, Choibalsan had also bagged an appointment as Minister of Defense. With this collection of job titles, he now had the authority to carry out the anti-Buddhist repression which Stalin craved so much. In October 1937, he staged a Soviet-style show trial against 23 lamas as main defendants. In 1938, some 800 monasteries were destroyed, and thousands of clerics arrested or executed. The purges extended also to ethnic minorities, such as the Kazakhs and Buryats, accused of sympathy for Japan. In early 1939, Soviet People's Commissar for Defense Voroshilov ordered Choibalsan to round up all the officials responsible for carrying out the 1937 and 1938 purges. They were all arrested, effectively decapitating the People's Party of its historical leadership. In March 1939, Choibalsan completed the Purge of the Purgers by arresting the Mongolian Prime Minister Anadin Amar. Following an established tradition, Amar was deported to Moscow, tortured, and executed. The next natural step was for Choibalsan to be appointed Prime Minister. He had become the uncontested strongman of Mongolia, the Stalin of the steppes. Hey, I said the title of the thing. The first test for the newly appointed prime minister was an undeclared war, the Battle of Khorloogiin. Between May and August 1939, border skirmishes with the Japanese army escalated in full-on military conflict. The Japanese were eventually beaten back by a Soviet-Mongolian force led by General Zhukov and Choibalsan himself. This contributed enormously to Choibalsan's strong cult of personality. Taking a leaf from his chief ally and protector, the prime minister's image became ubiquitous and unavoidable, as he was worshipped as a sort of demigod. But unlike his chief ally and protector, Choibalsan did not have to fight an existential war. In fact, by the early 1940s, the Soviet Union was busy repelling the Axis invasion. Meanwhile, Japan was slugging it out against the allies in China, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific. As a result, the Mongolian front was mostly quiet. Okay, mostly, but not entirely. Stalin would declare war against Imperial Japan only in 1945. After Khalkhin Gol, and prior to that date, his main concern in East Asia was to damage Chiang Kai-shek's Chinese nationalists by extending control over the Xinjiang region rich in valuable minerals. To do so, in cooperation with Choibalsan, he fomented the separatist movements of the Uyghur and the Kazakhs in the area, providing military support via Mongolia. On January 22, 1944, Choibalsan met with Stalin and Foreign Affairs Commissar Molotov to discuss the situation in Xinjiang. During the meeting, Stalin encouraged Choibalsan to attack the Chinese nationalists. "Are you afraid of China? Why don't you strike a good blow?" to which Choibalsan replied that he'd rather support a Kazakh independentist leader called Osman. Stalin agreed to the plan, ordering for weapons and military instructors to be sent via Mongolia. On February 22nd, Choibalsan was the guest of honor at a dinner reception at the Kremlin. As the Mongolian prime minister started coughing, Stalin offered him a bottle of vodka. "This is Petrovska. It is good for cough. If you drink 3 glasses of it, the cough will go away." The Soviet dictator then offered him another treat, the Chinese province of Inner Mongolia, or rather, he clearly stated, "Choibalsan is not only the leader of Outer Mongolia, but also of Inner Mongolia," hinting that the Soviet Union would support Mongolian expansionism at the expense of Chiang Kai-shek. But in the spring and summer of 1945, Stalin had a change of heart and sought a peaceful settlement with Chinese nationalists in preparation for an attack against the Japanese in Manchukuo. As part of the agreement, Stalin would cease interfering with Xinjiang and promised to not support Mao Zedong's communist faction. In exchange, Chiang Kai-shek would formally renounce any plan to take over Mongolia and recognize the independence of the country. This settlement pulled the plug on Choibalsan's dreams to annex Inner Mongolia, but he was happy with the deal nonetheless, as he stated to the Soviet ambassador in Ulaanbaatar. "Yes, this is what we want, but we will not have friendship with the Chinese. These are very, very bad people," said the guy who killed over 800 households, apparently. Ever the faithful ally, Choibalsan even committed a large army to the Soviet attack in Manchukuo. 80,000 troops, more than 10% of the entire Mongolian population at the time. This force fought alongside the Red Army in a spectacularly quick and successful campaign in August of 1945, a decisive contributor to Japanese surrender in World War II. After the end of the war in Asia, Choibalsan looked again beyond the border, seeking to annex once and for all Xinjiang and Inner Mongolia. As usual, he hoped to gain Moscow's backing. After all, Stalin had supported similar territorial claims in the past. But the premier had little appetite for another war so soon. In February 1946, he refused to help Choibalsan, allowing him only to conduct separatist propaganda. This had little effect, and Choibalsan's schemes were dealt a decisive blow by the communist victories in the ongoing civil war against the Chinese nationalists. Communist leader Mao Zedong had secured an alliance with Stalin, and therefore the Soviet leader could not favor the annexation of Chinese lands by Choibalsan. In February 1949, Mao asked the Soviets to relinquish their influence on Mongolia. In fact, he wanted for the country to be annexed to his new communist China. Pressured from both sides, Stalin also rejected Mao's petitions, eventually maintaining the status quo. This was not enough for Choibalsan, who still had hopes of uniting a greater Mongolia. Gradually, he lost confidence in the man who had been his main ally, protector, and mentor. Relations between the two leaders deteriorated to the point that Choibalsan refused to attend Stalin's 70th birthday celebrations in Moscow. Meanwhile, Choibalsan's health had been deteriorating, strained by years of war, political tension, and heavy drinking. At the end of 1951, the prime minister was visited by a Soviet doctor who diagnosed him with kidney cancer and insisted that he travel to Moscow for treatment. Choibalsan initially resisted the idea, but eventually relented and underwent surgery at the Kremlin hospital on January 25, 1952. The operation had been a success apparently, but the next day Prime Minister Choibalsan suddenly died of complications from surgery. According to Mongolian news outlet Sonin.mn, Choibalsan's death may have been the result of intentional poisoning ordered by Stalin himself, and no one would be surprised if that were the case. That is a very Russian thing to do, looking at you, Vladimir Putin. According to their December 2020 article, Choibalsan may have been exploring a non-aligned stance similar to the one of Marshal Tito in Yugoslavia, a political move which Stalin could not tolerate. Regardless of the cause of death, Choibalsan remained a looming presence in Mongolian politics and society, as he was remembered as a champion of independence, a defender of the motherland, and an energetic force who drove the country into the 20th century. It is an undisputed fact that the Prime Minister achieved great success in modernizing Mongolia. Thanks to the aid negotiated with the Soviets, Choibalsan greatly diversified the country's economy, developing the mining, industrial, and transportation sectors. The Prime Minister dedicated special attention to the education system. To quote just one statistic, at the dawn of Choibalsan's political career in 1921, there was only one elementary school in all of Mongolia. At the time of his death, the number of schools had grown to 426. Just 6 less, and it would be a funny number. But just like it happened to his main backer, Joseph Stalin, Choibalsan's successors eventually denounced and rejected the most brutal aspects of his legacy: the purges, the massacres, and the oppression of ethnic and religious groups. As early as February 1962, the Central Committee of the Mongolian People's Party issued a resolution to take decisive measures to ensure complete liquidation of the harmful consequences of Choibalsan's cult of personality in all spheres of life. The process of dismantling the remnants of Choibalsan's ego was protracted until August 2005, when Mongolia's democratic government decided to remove his monumental mausoleum. Choibalsan's memorial has since been replaced with a colossal statue dedicated to another ruthless yet unquestionably legendary ruler of Mongolia, Genghis Khan or Chenghis Khan, whatever you prefer. Pronounce it however you like, they're both accepted. And then complain about it in the comments. That's a Biographics tradition too. I hope you learned something today, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment a historical figure we haven't covered yet, subscribe and ring that bell, and share this video with someone who loves learning about history's most important people. I'm Eric Malachite, and we'll see you next time.